Why are we talking about this? So very quickly, catching up on time to give you enough time to talk to our experts. I'm Benny. I'm going to lead the session today. Why is this important? We are in a decade, we are in a time where human impact on the world is massive. We have to take action to combat that, to conserve our environment. And there's different nationalities, different countries react differently to that. Some of them decide to leave climate agreements. Some of them decide to skip school and protest. Now, there's different countries in the world, there's different regions in the world that have the resources and the power to react differently to environmental change. And this is what today is about. It's about discussing about the global north and the global south, and we have two great experts here that's going to talk about it. And to discuss this, to see what can we do different. And also for you, hopefully, to then take that back to your nations, to your home, and bring this into action. So we have two people. We have Professor Ulrich Brandt, who is a professor in Vienna. He is an international politics professor, and he defined, together with his co-authors, the term Imperial lifestyle. He's going to start. We're going to see a short 25 minutes video where he gives you a bit of background and talks about this specific topic. Then after, we have Vositha Wijenayake. She's from Sri Lanka. And she's also talking about her work, especially around NGOs and what you can do with grassroots and youth movements to change the world. After that, I'm going to open the plenary session, so then it's up to you. Both of them will be here via video call. They unfortunately can't join us in person due to schedule and also visa problems. Vositha unfortunately didn't get her visa issued. But still, they'll be here, they'll be ready for your questions, and they're two very fascinating people, and I hope you use this chance to talk to them, and they will be able to see you as well. They have you on there on a little camera. So now, let's start with Ulrich, Professor Brandt, who's already on screen, and please enjoy the video, and then we're going to see Vositha's, and then we have the discussion. Enjoy.
Dear participants at the International Student Week in Ilmenau, I'm happy to give you this talk, this keynote on environmental conservation and some other topics. This talk is pre-recorded. I will come then live to the discussion after the talk and after the two presentations. Some days before your congress or your conference, and it's recorded in Weimar at the Bauhaus University, actually, which is close to Ilmenau. Here I'm at a conference on post-growth cities, quite interesting, and because I have my PhD seminar in parallel to your conference, we decided to pre-record it. I would like to thank Sankalp Pawar and his colleagues, the organizers of the conference, for organizing your conference, the Initiative for World Solidarity Ilmenau, and also for the invitation. We agreed that I will talk in the next 30 minutes about two issues. One is, what are the main drivers why environmental conservation is so difficult to achieve? And then also in a second half, but I will mix it a bit, what are differences between North and South? And I will introduce here a concept I'm working on, and I will send you also an announcement of a book that was published last year, and the concept is called the Imperial Mode of Living, and more precisely the Imperial Mode of Production and Living, which I think gives us some analytical tools to think the differences, but also the similarities between the North and the South. But I will start framing a bit what is the state of the art of environmental conservation, of sustainable development policies, with some points of departure. One, I'm a political scientist, so I'm a social scientist, and this is a bit my approach, and I'm sure that also at the conference are students from humanities, from natural sciences, so please ask them questions when you are not familiar with my terms. But usually in social sciences, we first of all, we contextualize what we are talking about. So the first to understand sustainable development and sustainable politics and its problems is to go back to the 1990s, when the term sustainable development, which came out of the famous Brundtland report in 1986, 1987, and then the Rio conference in 1992, on development and environment, and there the term sustainable development really became famous. So what happened there? At the institutional level, the Framework Convention on Climate Change was agreed upon, and it then was realized and implemented since 1995. The other important convention is the Convention on Biological Diversity, also agreed upon in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. The so-called Rio Agenda and the local agendas, very important to implement sustainable development. So, but what was left out at the conference in these debates was two parallel processes. And I think this gives us some hints why it's so difficult to implement sustainable development policies and environmental conservation. The first is that parallel to the Rio conference and to these rising of environmental concerns and international politics to be implemented at national and local levels was what we can call, and called also at this time, neoliberal politics in the new phase of globalization. The opening of the markets, which started in the 70s and 80s, the liberalization of the financial markets, the enormous increase of international trade, and then since the mid of the 90s, the increase and the enormous economic expansion in China, in India, and the so-called emerging economies. This was a very important process, but it was not present, if you like, on the terrain or of the thinking of sustainable development. Sustainable development was much more in the policy fields of environment and development, but not so much in economic policies, in financial policies that remained very much growth-oriented and very much unsustainable. The second aspect, which was left out at in these debates around sustainable development at this time, was the so-called New World Order, coined by George Bush, the President of the United States, in 1992, a year and a half before the Rio conference in June 1992. In 1991, we had in January 1991 the invasion of Iraq. So the so-called New World Order, stated by the US president, claimed that the US with its military force needs to reorder the world, which was then, if you like, actualized after the attack of the Twin Towers in New York in September 2001. So a parallel process to sustainable development, to the neoliberalization of politics, was a new understanding of the securitization of the world, what is called since 2001 then, some years later, the war against terrorism, for example. So the point is, what I want to make is that sustainable development remained within the sphere of development policies, environmental policies, and did not look in a more comprehensive way at the society. This changed in the last years, and I would say this is a major advance. I jumped to the crisis of 2007, 2008, the economic crisis, but also we should consider the failure of the Copenhagen conference in 2009 of the FCCC, the Framework Convention on Climate Change. At this time, or since this time, if you like, understanding emerged that we need more comprehensive approaches, that it's not enough to reduce environmental policies to a policy field, climate change policies, biodiversity policies, and so on, or to developmental policies, but to have a more comprehensive approach. At this time, another term emerged, which was called the green economy, or the greening of the economy. And some years later, also a very fancy concept, I did a lot of work on that, social ecological transformation. So, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals that was agreed upon in September 2015 from the General Assembly of the United Nations, the title of this, of the 17 SDGs, the title of the document is Transforming Our World. So I would say this is a major step. Why? A major step that now environmental policies and development policies were framed more comprehensive. The SDGs, as you know, are not any longer only goals for the so-called Global South, but for all countries. While the Millennium Development Goals from 2000, 2001 were restricted to the Global South. So I would say we have a broader field to understand the change and to understand environmental conservation in this more comprehensive sense. However, despite the recognition, the broader recognition of environmental concerns, that it's really about social ecological transformation, about the transformation of our production and consumption patterns, about our societies, if you like, as a transformation in the term. It's the term form is a very looks at the very deep structures of our societies, the economic structures, the political structures, the cultural structures. Despite this, my criticism with many other scholars is that the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, still remain in an understanding that the existing institutions, the state, the market, the consumers, they should change the world. So we have, at the one hand, a very radical diagnosis of the required change, social ecological transformation, but at the other hand, we have incremental proposals to achieve this. I called this in an article published in 2016. I will send you the article. It's a 4-pager. It's a very short article. The New Critical Orthodoxy. The new critical orthodoxy of green economy and social ecological transformation as a mainstream is very radical diagnosis, but a very incremental and not very utopian understanding of change, of transformation. So the critical thing is that, of course, it's critical with respect to neoliberal politics. It's not business as usual, but the orthodoxy, in the sense it's a belief, a dominant belief that we will achieve it via Western knowledge, via experts, via the state, via the market, etc., without questioning private property, without questioning the dynamics of a capitalist growth, without questioning the dynamics of the powerful state, which mainly acts in securing the interest of the elites, of the dominant economic actors, etc., etc. This is a bit, let's say, the terrain where we are today and why it's so difficult to achieve environmental conservation and sustainable development. And now I come in the second part of my talk to my own research, and this starts with an observation. The research I will talk about is on the imperial mode of living, or the imperial mode of production and living. And I will send you a short article, a 4-pager in English, published last year to get an overview, and then also a book I published with my colleague Markus Wissen, the co-author, and our main book, our monograph, which was published in 2017 in German on the imperial mode of living, will be published. We are translating it now into English, Chinese, Korean, Spanish, and other languages, and we can make it available to you within the next months. So the starting point is that we have a relatively high consciousness, and not only in the global north, but also in countries like China or India, about environmental problems. People see that the cities are not any longer livable, that we have an enormous air pollution in cities like Shanghai, Beijing, and elsewhere, or Sao Paulo or Johannesburg, or New Delhi. And so we have a certain awareness of the environmental problems. We have an awareness of water scarcity, of resource scarcity, of climate change and others. We call it a certain repoliticization of the environmental crisis. However, the economic system, the political system, largely remains as it is. So there is an attractiveness, if you like, of the Western lifestyles, of the Western mode of living, of the American way of life, the Western way of life. And we have still, and this brings me to the North-South divide, we have still an enormous division between the global North and the global South, that usually people in the global North have a much easier and much larger access to the global resources. If we think about smartphones, food, materials for housing, to use transport systems and so on, than most people in the global South. However, there are some changes. I will come back to this. But as a starting point, we have to look at the ambiguity that there is a broad recognition of the ecological crisis, of the social ecological crisis. But however, it's so difficult to change and to implement the SDGs, sustainability policies, and so on. So the term imperial mode of living is also criticizing the incremental approach of a green economy. A green economy usually means that the state creates the regulatory framework that then the investors, the companies, the consumers behave adequately. And it's important to green the economy. But however, what the green economy discourse with this idea that if we have the adequate framework, the investors, the consumers will behave adequately, this underestimates the existing power structures, that we have a strong fossil fuel capital. We have a strong food industry. We have large land tenures and so on. So that the green economy discourse is aiming at greening the existing institutions. Remember what I said in my first part. But it's underestimating the existing power relations. And it underestimates, and then I'll come now back to this, what we call the imperial mode of living. So the concept of the imperial mode of living is linking the economic, political, and cultural structures of globalization. Yeah, think about free trade policies, think about the power of the global investors, and at the cultural level, think about the still remaining power of racism, of devaluating people from other world regions or other world regions per se. So to link these structures with the everyday life of people in the global north. So that people in the global north, not because they have a bad intention, but in fact, they refer in their everyday life constantly to the cheap resources and the cheap labor from the global south when they are consuming products, commodities, when they eat, when they buy a smartphone, when they buy a notebook, when they use the plane, when they use a car that is produced with inputs from the global south, from the nature, from people who work there, and so on. When they clothes, when they buy their clothes, and so on. So this is the main idea of the imperial mode of living. And contrary to the neoliberal and neoclassical thinking that they argue, if we have growth rates that are high enough, everybody will live better off. We argue with the imperial mode of living, no, the imperial mode of living is producing structurally, systematically exclusion. Not everybody can live the imperial mode, the Western mode of living, the highest standard of living, because it needs the devaluation of nature. It needs the cheap labor from elsewhere. This is key for our argument. But the imperial mode of living is, with a term from Antonio Gramsci, an Italian philosopher who wrote 100 years ago, it's hegemonic. It's broadly accepted among the people in the global north. Yeah, so people, they don't have a bad intention. They don't want to menace the natural resources in the global south, or they don't want that people in the world market factories in China live in a poor sense. But in fact, they live in their everyday lives the imperial mode of living. The imperial mode of living, as I said, it's structurally exclusive. And it also produces violence when we think about the appropriation of gold, of silver, of minerals, of oil, of gas from elsewhere, which is usually in conflict with the local people, with the local communities. Additionally, and since you are a world association, I think it's very, very important to point at this, we argue that among the middle classes of the emerging economies of the global south, when they have a rising income, when they live materially better, they try to copy the imperial mode of living. So if you live in a country like China or Brazil or Argentina or South Africa or India, and it's not a moralistic critique, it's just an observation. If you have more income, you try to copy the Western lifestyle, the imperial mode of living, by having a larger house, an apartment, to have a car, to fly when you go for vacations, to have meat, with the exception maybe of India, but usually the diet is changing. McDonald's comes in, the smartphone industry comes in, the globalized clothes production comes in, and so on. So the dynamics of the imperial mode of living is not in a generalized sense, not for all people, but for those people in the emerging economies, for the middle classes, and of course historically for the upper classes, is very attractive. So if you think about China, Brazil, and as I already named it, or Mexico, people have more income because the economies are booming, because the demands from the global north or from China or other countries is growing. This enables or generates a larger income, and so people try to copy the imperial mode of living. I just give you an example. I was last September in Mexico City. I was there several times in the 1990s for research, and in Mexico City, in 12 years, in one of the largest cities of the world, in 12 years, the number of cars more than doubled, which means that you don't have only the traffic jam in the morning and in the afternoon or early evening, but you have all the day traffic jams. The infrastructure didn't grow as fast as the legitimate wish of people to have a car. This is then also framed that public transport is not secure and so on. So you need a car, but it's also a question of status. Yeah? So to understand this, that the imperial mode of living is very dynamic in the global north, already since the post-war period, since post-war II, but it also becomes attractive of the global south. This is a bit the term we want to coin. And this, of course, I don't have to, I think, mention this or underline this. This is causing not only inequality, despite that many people in the emerging economies are living better off, but it's, of course, also causing the ecological crisis. Yeah? If we look at the so-called Great Acceleration after the Second World War, that all the resources were used much more and tripled, fourfolded, fivefolded within a few years. Now we call it a second Great Acceleration, that the use of resources or the emissions are even growing more, despite the global consciousness, if you like, about the environmental crisis. So to sum this up, the imperial mode of living, or the imperial mode of production living, is linked to this, as I said, economic, political structures, transnational corporations, economic interests, politics, and so on. But it also has to do with the everyday practices of people, of their everyday life, of our everyday life, which is usually not bad intended, and with the so-called dispositives, with the discourses of a good living. A good living is still a living with growth. I just arrived here in Thüringen some days ago, and here the election campaign started. And the Green Party, where you think the Green Party is the forefront party of ecological consciousness, what is one of the messages for the Green Party for the election in Thüringen in the upcoming fall? Sustainable growth. So we need growth. This is the unquestionable thinking. And then, of course, the Green Party says it should be sustainable. But the discussions about degrowth, about the questioning of the capitalist growth imperative is left out. So this is why in the last part of my talk, of my intervention, and then we can discuss it when I come to you via live stream, I want to underline two things. The first is the alternative, we call it in our book on the imperial mode of living, a solidarity or a solidaristic mode of production and living, which means to create well-being not via the world market and not via the capitalist principle of making profits, but to have a well-being which relies much more on public aspects, on a solidarity economy. I give you an example. Why a city like, I'm not familiar with Ilmenau, so I refer here to Weimar, or I live in Vienna in Austria. Why a city needs to provide the mobility of its people mainly via cars, cars that are capitalistically produced, cars that are environmentally damaging, cars that are at the same time promising something, freedom or liberty or whatever. But what we need in a mode of production, mode of living, is to get rid of a principle that mobility is mainly secured by cars. So we need to avoid the so-called forced mobility, that people need to move away to other world regions, to other regions because they cannot pay the rent in their city, so they have to move out, but then they have to commute every day to their workplace. So this is the so-called forced mobility. But also other forms of mobility should be changed and shaped away from the automobility, or at longer distances, away from using the plane to fly. We need a European transport system that really assures that people can move with a good train system via night trains and whatever, also over 1,500 or even 2,000 kilometers. Yeah, today it's attractive because it's cheap, and it's, of course, the faster system to use a plane, but we need a complete shift in the mobility system. A second example I can give you is nutrition, is food, the food system. Today, there is a capitalistically dominated food system, what the agrarian sociologist Philip McMichael called the food from nowhere. So it's not important where our food comes from, where the foodstuff for the animals and so on comes from. It should be cheap. And what we need is a rethinking of our food system, which probably among young students, is today quite familiar, not to eat so much meat. And if we eat meat, it should be regionally and ecologically produced. We should have in the principle of ecological and regionally produced food. Of course, not the coffee in Ilmenau. This is not able to produce, but the main diet should be really produced also under socially acceptable conditions and ecologically sustainable and regional. So this would be the shifts, and this is the proposal. And we have many others, the debates about commons and others in the book. And to close, since I'm here now in Weimar at the conference on post-growth cities, and maybe some of the students also participated at the conference, or are participating because I give my talk during the conference here in Weimar, is the concept of degrowth. The concept of degrowth, the debate started already in the 70s and gained new dynamics in the economic crisis in 2007 and 2008. The idea of degrowth is not to cheer the crisis and to say a crisis or crises are good, because usually crises are solved at the back of ordinary people. The elites usually, they save their interests, they save their money, their assets. Usually a crisis is bad for ordinary people. And a dealing of a crisis is not per se good for the environment. But the idea of degrowth is different. The idea of degrowth is to remake our societies and to push back the dominance of the principle of profit making, of the so-called exchange value over the concrete value, the use value, that the profit making, the exchange value, is dominating our society and our economy, which is a capitalist economy. And this is linked, of course, to interest, to large investors, of very wealthy people. So the idea of degrowth is to restructure and to remake our economy, that our housing, our foodstuff, our mobility systems are not mainly done under the principle of capitalist profit making. And I'm not familiar with Ilmenau, but being in Weimar, being often in Berlin, being living in Vienna, it's quite interesting how the recent movements, right to the city, a slogan that comes from the 1970s from Henri Lefebvre, a French philosopher, this movement is gaining force and argues the houses, the apartments, should be owned by them who live there and should not be owned by large investors who are aiming to make profit, or at least if it's not an individualistic possession of the houses, it should be organized in collective ways via associations and what else. But the idea is to liberate the housing markets from the capitalist profit imperative, which means as we see all over the world, an enormous increase of the rent for people that many families pay half of their income only for the rent, etc., etc. So I leave it here. This is my intervention. I am happy that you listened to me, and we will meet also via Skype, but then live the 21st of May in the afternoon. And so far, thank you for your attention.
Is it on now? Very good. I hope you could still hear me. So now that was Professor Brandt talking a lot about the theory and a lot about the academic framework about that. We now have Vositha. Vositha is the director of the SLYCAN Trust. That's the Sri Lankan Youth Action Network. She's famous for grassroots movements, working closely with NGOs and youth groups. So really going for tangible results, working towards a certain goal, achieving that with everyone involved here. So she's going to quickly talk about her approach to climate change and also how to conserve the environment. And then we'll also introduce you to a few of her projects. And then afterwards, both of them will be available for your questions. So if we are ready with the next video, let's play it.
I'm an international lawyer. I'm an international specializing in public international law and we work at national level, regional level, as well as international level. Some of the issues we focus on are climate change, environment protection, animal welfare, wildlife, sustainable development, and other processes which are related to research, advocacy, and also ground level action. I'm also a delegate or a member of the Sri Lankan delegation to the UNFCCC process, where I focus on issues such as compliance, climate change adaptation, loss and damage, and MRV. And I've been part of the UNFCCC or the climate change discussion since 2009, so close to 10 years now. First of all, I'd like to apologize for not being at your event in person. The idea was that I would be until last week. As maybe you know, there have been certain issues in Sri Lanka which has prevented me from coming, like security issues, which has created difficulties for visa processes. And I apologize for the difficulties created by that to the organizers as well as to you. But I'm very grateful that I'm able to attend, at least via video and online. And I look forward to discussing with you on the issues that I'll be presenting on now, following this presentation. So going to the conversation or the presentation, my presentation has a few key issues. One on global north and global south, the discussion around it at international negotiations, at international development actions within these processes, and then how livelihoods resilience building could be linked with environmental conservation, and how to address vulnerabilities in a manner which is holistic and bringing together people and a participatory process for decision making. So speaking on global south and global north, my first encounter on this was when I was a youth delegate or participant in the UNFCCC process as a youth person 10 years ago. And there was a division we discussed about historical responsibility, how the global north should be providing support to the global south, because over decades and decades, resources had been utilized by the global north countries, and that this has led to their development versus resource depletion of other countries, which are developing countries today. And these discussions usually end with bitterness or certain issues created among the two parties, because there is always a pointing of fingers, compensation, conversations, and how can we more in this discussion? How can the developing countries get more access to finance, more technology? and more capacity. And then as a youth 10 years ago, I used to wonder how all these countries could come together and meet a common objective without pointing fingers at each other and without any disharmony or conflict. And today, with the Paris Agreement and even the UNFCCC processes progress, we see this happening where countries have come together to address climate change as a common goal. Preserve environment, conserve environment, ecosystem resources, address issues of economic development with a different lens, which is climate friendly, environmental friendly, and also have commitments which are common but different nevertheless. So, for example, the nationally determined contributions which are under the Paris Agreement, which countries have submitted being parties to it, are common in the sense that everyone is going towards emission cuts to meet targets that would help bring down the temperature increase and keep it well below 2 degrees or 1.5 as we would like it to be. And the difference is that the countries are capacities by giving them the decision-making power on what the countries could commit to. So, for example, the developing countries would have support, means of implementation from developed countries to implement these actions. And also the countries would commit what they can in an unconditional manner through the resources at national level. So, for example, if a developing country, a global south country, says, I would, or we as a country, would reduce 4% emissions as of 2010, the baseline year, within the national capacity, then that would be an unconditional target. Whereas a conditional target would be, okay, if we have 20%, if we have more money or finance or technology that could be given to us, then we could bring it higher to 20% reductions. So the conditional and unconditional, where the countries commit with their national capacity as well as ask for more support. If there's more support, then we can do more kind of approach. But it's within a common structure where everybody's working together to achieve this common objective. So we recognize the countries are having different capacities to do things or to perform or implement actions. But we recognize also that each country would like to do something about addressing the environmental issues that are there, the climate issues that are there, and work together to achieve a common objective. So this is about Global South and Global North. And one thing we need to remember is that Global South is not all like India or China or Argentina. There are different countries in it, and they have different capacities. So among the Global South, there might be different countries with different capacities. For example, there's least developed countries. There are small island nations which are impacted by climate change and losing their land and islands. And then there's also the countries that have a certain amount of economic growth that has technology more than the others. So that change of north-south can be among the south-south also for support. For example, the technology transfer that could have been 10 years back from the north to the south, today could be from the south to south. And it doesn't mean that it's all about Western technology. For example, it could be indigenous knowledge. It could be a capacity that's there available in a least developed country, an experience, or a lessons learned that are available in countries that are not necessarily with a high economic growth, but experiences for resilience building that could be practiced in other countries also. So there's a South-South collaboration that could happen, even for research capacity building. For example, there are networks that are set up among southern countries, global South countries. For example, capacity building networks for least developed countries, which are led by universities and think tanks, not necessarily countries per se. So different stakeholders are playing a role in bridging this gap between the North and the South, as well as the dependence of the North based technologies to take actions in the South. So these are a few things on the policy and the international practices that we are engaging in at the moment. So going back in terms of work So I've been working for half of my work life mainly on policies and laws. And then I realized, okay, we want to have effective and evidence-based policies and laws which are practiced across the nations. We need to have evidence-based actions taken. So science-based policies developed as well as ground-level action that linked with this. So the last 4-5 years of my life in work, I've tried to work a lot with the communities to work on conserving environment, bringing the experiences to the policy discussions and decision-making processes through their participation as well as knowledge that is collected and gathered through practice. I showcase a few of our work experiences so that you could get a glimpse of how conservation and environment protection happens. But before I go to that, one thing we need to also remember is how resource management and resource access could be very critical to avoid conflicts as well as build peace. Now, as countries that are developing, most of our countries have been colonized. And then when we gained independence from the colonizers and moved to governing as independent states, there was also the problem of how do we use resources that are like water resources with different countries accessing the same resource. So if there's no equitable access and resource management that is in place properly, it could lead to conflict. So it's very important that resources are utilized in a manner which is equitable, shared, and also through a governance system which is participatory. And also in the post-war and conflict times, resource management also plays a key role in conserving environment because conflicts can damage environment, degrade, and create or deplete what is existing as resources. And then existing resources and the scarcity of resources could lead to additional more conflict. So it's very important that we build the resources that are available and make it grow more and build resilience of communities in a post-conflict situation as well. So going into the examples of some of our work. So first I'd like to show you some work that we do on mangrove restoration. This is in the north of Sri Lanka. This is the first restoration effort that we made, and you could see that it's a dry area which is not having a lot of water. So it's the north of Sri Lanka, and the monsoons, there are 2 monsoons, and it doesn't get a lot of water most of the year. And it's also one of the areas that the civil war was there in Sri Lanka for 30 years. So here we have an effort of resilience building, environmental protection, as well as peace building, where we got communities, university students, agriculture-based civil society organizations, government entities, and everybody to come together and work together to address resilience building to climate change through mangrove restoration. So for those who are not very familiar with how mangroves work with climate change impacts, mangroves are one of the key warriors of combating climate change. So it also is a natural means of addressing it. Plus, we try to link it with livelihood development through giving support to the communities to have nurseries set up, where they could also have nurseries to develop samplings of mangroves, plus for the agriculture activities. So a year later, when we visit this site now, this is what we see. There have been rains. It's the rainy season these days. And then there are migratory birds, flamingos, and many other birds that are there. It's not the clearest picture, but I think you can notice a difference. So we would like to replicate something like this and experience this at different areas where we possibly can practice this. One thing we've learned is that livelihoods of communities need to be linked in restoration efforts. Ecosystem services need to be brought together, linked with conservation so that it would be lasting. So what we are trying to do is in the other areas that we are doing mangrove restoration, to have a concept where the communities that are vulnerable to climate and environment impacts would be contributing to the conservation efforts, while they also have resilience built and livelihoods that are strengthened. So this is one of the examples. And then we also have another example where we have conservation, organic agriculture, economic diversification as key issues. We introduced peanut as one of the crops to the farmers that are impacted by climate change, droughts, and vulnerable to different health issues because of the overuse of pesticides, and the soil is degraded because of this. And the area that we've chosen is the eastern province of Sri Lanka. So it's called Trincomalee, and we started work with them. About 200 families were targeted. And we focus on women and gender empowerment through livelihood development for women, because the paddy cultivation is the main cultivation, and men mainly work on it. And women have their household practice plus a garden that's there, and they would like to engage. They engage, but not in the direct manner that the farmer is recognized as a woman. So we wanted to focus on the women's resilience building, which would bring capacity to the children as well as an additional income to the household. So some of the challenges we faced are the droughts that this area was facing, lack of water for agriculture, and also the lack of capacity and the knowledge of farmers to invest in crop diversification. But through certain capacity building workshops that we did with farmers, we gave them the knowledge how to develop organic fertilizer, and how they could introduce some crops such as peanuts, ginger, and other crops that are resilient to certain climatic situations where the paddy cultivation could not happen. So the main crop is paddy in these areas. And you could see that there's a lot of pesticides used, which is not healthy for the environment. But while knowing that they're getting sick, they still use pesticides because they want to have more food security based on production. So this is a difficulty that's being there, and awareness creation is key to addressing this kind of issue. And these are the farmers we work with, and they are reaping the harvest here, the peanuts that they have planted as an organic product. And this is how it looks when you take it out from the soil. So the first season of peanut plantation worked well, the cultivation worked well, but then these areas were impacted by droughts, which were very hard for them to overcome. And the next conversation is about how some risks, which are climate risks, could create harsher impacts and on environment as well as communities, and then that creates displacement or migration, internal migration of humans from villages to urban areas. Just to get a few images of people I'm speaking of, and also the fact that that these are not just men or adults we're talking of. There are children who are impacted by these climate hazards because their fathers will have to move to the urban areas, and they would not have an income, they would not have water even to plant a tree in their gardens. So there's a big lack of water resources that's there, and also the life of people changing because of the impacts that are on the environment. So if you look at this family, they have many issues, from economic difficulties, water scarcity, not being able to work in their paddy fields because of the droughts that are happening, and also the fact that it's mainly women who are in the area because men have moved to towns to find work. They're not skilled laborers because they've worked in paddy fields for a long time, but still they go looking for work because they need to find food. And this is another family like that, where the mother is not able to provide food for the children. And all these photos have been taken with permission for research that we've been conducting on climate displacement. And most of these families are also impacted by health issues because the water salinity is high, and there are kidney diseases that are caused by this. The pesticide use that has created or degraded the water level, water quality as well as the soil quality. There's a lot of space for research on this as well, how pesticide use as well as droughts and the salinity in water would create chronic kidney diseases in the country, and specifically in this area. And if you look at all these farmers, they're smallholder farmers, and not just the droughts that are impacting them, then they also complain of how wildlife and elephants are attacking their farms and agricultural areas. There are two sides to this story, because when there's no water for these elephants, they would come to areas where there are reservoirs, and the reservoirs are usually used by agricultural practitioners to access water for their cultivation. And then when the elephants do not have enough fruit plants to consume, then they decide to come to the nearest areas where they have these plantations and eat them. And then there's also the story where the farmers have taken over the land, which is the forest or the areas that the elephants were living, or the elephant corridors. So when we are finding resources, conserving environment, and trying to find solutions, we need to have solutions that do not create conflict, and humans and animals and environment all working together, which is important. Otherwise, it creates an imbalance and further issues. So if you look at this farmer, he's also a smallholder farmer, and whatever damage that's done to their crops would be a huge impact on their economy. So what our work has also understood that economy is important for all these vulnerable communities, and also accessing conservation as well as environment protection with ecosystem services linked to it. Livelihood development and resilience building is important. And also we've understood that youth play a key role, and that different entities need to work together to have better results. And as part of this, we've developed capacity building actions or activities that link different groups together. For example, private sector with youth, then policymakers with researchers and private sector, so that everybody could work together to address the existing environmental impacts. Some of these relate to capacity building and building entrepreneurship, which is social innovation based as well as ethical, as well as more social enterprises. So we have youth, we select and we develop their skills on how they could have a startup which is environment friendly, climate friendly, as well as ethical, with a social angle to it. And another project that we have, which is sustainable development based, is on sustainable food consumption and production. So as part of the work we do on sustainable development plus climate change related work, because livestock industry contributes a lot to climate change, and cutting down our meat consumption as well as dairy consumption, and shifting to a plant-based diet could create a lot of changes to the environment as well as our health. So one of our projects in partnership with Humane Society International is called Meatless Monday Sri Lanka. We've been doing this for 4 years now, and it focused mainly earlier on awareness creation, but now it's going towards building capacity of different stakeholders, for example, private sector, in introducing vegan and vegetarian food products, promoting the existing vegetarian and vegan food and suppliers that are available, and also advocating to policymakers and changing certain practices. For example, the Ministry of Environment of Sri Lanka has now adopted since February 2019 that they would not be using any meat-based products for their events. So that's a big win in terms of promoting sustainable lifestyles and food consumption and production, because if you can promote it as a national practice, then there are a lot of others who would engage and take it up as well. And we've seen a lot of small enterprises developing into really successful ones based on this kind of products, who worked with us over the last 4 years and who are doing really well, as well as larger private sector hotels and food chains that have adopted this as well. So cruelty-free, humane, and sustainable food consumption as an individual choice, as well as a production and entrepreneurship developing concept, is something that we've been trying to introduce for the last few years, and which we've been doing successfully as well. So to summarize what I've been speaking on, Global North and Global South, these two are concepts that we live with in international negotiations as well as international development. But it's not necessarily bipolar as it used to be before. And it's not as divisive as before. I think there's a merging of the Global South to the technology that's available in the Global North, as well as the South-South collaborations and different empowerment and capacity building ventures within the South that is empowering these countries to act together and work with the Global North to achieve good targets. Then second point is how risk management, resource management, and resource protection are key to avoid conflicts and peace building, how different parties, different countries, different stakeholders could work together, understanding each other's interests to conserve environment and protect environment. And then also the fact that different stakeholders need to work together if we want to achieve a common objective. Different stakeholders such as youth, media, policymakers, private sector, all need to understand the impacts on the environment and understand what are the best ways to address and conserve the environment in an intergenerational, intra-generational perspective and equity-based actions, so that we could achieve a certain trusteeship that would benefit the generations to come without destroying what is there today. So a good governance and participatory processes for decision making, and also evidence-based and conscious decision making is very important, to ensure that we have environmental protection and we conserve what's very valuable for sustainable life in this planet. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I will be available to answer them.
Very good. Thank you very much. Oh, blinded by the light. Quickly get Skype running. I hope you enjoyed those two speeches. I think very different approaches, in a way practicality and a way of actually taking action. But now we'll have them available in a minute or two. In the meantime, another important question for all of you. Who went to club rotation yesterday? Yes? No? Maybe? I guess the ones that stayed until late are not here today. I hope you enjoyed that. I mean, it's been mostly info point, but also taking my rounds around. Who went to the C Club? Anyone C Club? Yes, yes, yes. I heard they were open the longest, so you must have been proud of the best crowd out there, so congratulations to that. There will be a few more options to enjoy also maybe the other clubs, but C Club is a solid choice, very solid choice. And I can see that they should be able to see us now. Hello, good afternoon.
Hello.
Oh, can you hear us well from in the Outermax? Can we get a shout, please? There's still a little bit of sleep, as you can hear. Ms. Wijenayake, because we did not talk in person yet, how would you like me to address you? First name, last name basis?
Oh, you can just call me Vositha.
Hi, Vositha. I'm Benny.
Hi, Benny.
So we're just waiting person to join. So the crowd just saw your video, so they are fully up to speed on what you're doing.
Okay. Sorry.
In the meantime, so Professor Brand seems not to be available at the moment, but maybe we just want to already... Shall we start with a question for Vositha then? Sankalp, looking at you. Yes? All right. So thank you very much for sending and sharing your video. What I really personally like, now I'll just start with the question off, is both you, Professor Brand, were also touching on the North versus the South, lifestyle choices, and also in a way of, in his video, the dominance of the Northern lifestyle. And I think you made a great point of the South-to-South exchange. So actually not allowing the North to dominate the conversation and actually being, proud and listening to what is happening in the other parts of the world. And so my first question for you to start off is, so how would you encourage this? So what would be your suggestions, also maybe in line with your work that you're already doing to establish a South-to-South conversation, and maybe thereby also creating a change in the perception of, okay, the Northern lifestyle is what we all should do in the long run?
Okay, I hope you can hear me, and I'm going to just keep talking, think you can hear me. So to address the question on how South-South collaboration could happen, I think it doesn't necessarily have to be among countries, like I highlighted in my speech. It can be among universities, it can be among youth organizations. It could start from sharing of experiences on common topics that you work on. For example, sustainable food production and consumption. How does it happen in Germany? How can you convince people in Germany to approach vegetarian or vegan lifestyles, or not use a lot of energy in producing something? And then how can you apply it in another country? And it could be the other way around as well. If it's working in Sri Lanka, how can it be used in another country like India or Pakistan or Bangladesh? So it doesn't have to be necessarily between North and South or just South and South. It could be like a holistic action that we take where we share experiences and work together to implement them, because lessons learned could be addressed if they're contextualized, whether it's in the North or the South. And either party could lead the way as long as it's a good outcome that comes out of it.
Thank you very much. Do we have a question from the audience at the moment? Yes, there in light green in the middle. Could we just pass the microphone, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris. Thank you for your presentation, Vositha. So you talked about the countries coming together, for example, for the Paris Agreement, and there's a step into the right direction. So I actually feel like it's not really happening in the way it has to be happening. So especially in Germany, it's really difficult to change things, and we flagged ourselves to be like light in the future, so that we want to start the change, and we want to change our energy supply, for example. But actually this year the amount of wind energy is going down because the subventions run out and the government is not putting new ones in place. So I would say this actually fails at the moment for us. So for me, the question is it the right approach to say to look to the say North countries and ask for their technologies or their approaches, and then apply it in the South, or do it in a different way maybe? Because from my perspective, I feel like this is not working well enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for that question. On Germany, actually, Germany is my second home because my husband is German. So I have a good relationship with Germany in that level, but I don't think we need to learn everything from Germany, and everything that happens in Germany should be replicated in the developing countries. So I'm sorry if I didn't make myself clear in the presentation, whether I confused people by what I was trying to say. So just to clarify, I think we need to apply things that are contextualized. Lessons and technology that's in the Western world doesn't necessarily work if you apply it to the developing countries, the global South. So what is best and how we need to work needs to be contextualized by geography and then experiences of the country. That's why the NDCs are country-driven, while working towards actions that are towards a mitigation goal and adaptation goal, which is global. So what I wanted to say that is what we are doing, the technology that we use needs to be country-specific, suitable, and if it's working from the west to the north, if it's suitable, then applying it works. But doesn't mean that we need to follow the north in applying what the north is doing all the time in the south, because it doesn't work. It's been proven that it doesn't work in many instances. So if, for example, if we're applying an adaptation measure under the Paris Agreement, the resilience building could be country-driven and decided by the country as to what's best. Did I answer that question? And I guess we can also learn from the South on how we are building resilience, biodiversity protection and conservation, and apply it in the North as well.
Thank you very much. I would have, because I'm not sure if we have Professor joining at the moment. Okay, so I would have a question that was actually on a follow-up for him, but not sure if you're familiar with his work. So he's talking about this kind of imperial lifestyle that's been pushed into different countries where, oh, the way the North is doing things is like the kind of standard. You know, he's criticizing that, I think, for very, very good reason, and talking about we need to establish a more global perspective and view. So one question I would have to you, because you're already, you know, in the projects you mentioned, it's about exchange within the countries and like peer-to-peer. What would be your take on, like, what is a way to maybe establish, like, what is something we can do to change this perspective? Because I think, as you rightfully say, like, not everything the North does should be done everywhere, but a lot of people seem to think that in a global context. So what would be your thoughts on how could we tackle that? What could be an approach to establish this kind of more sustainable lifestyle perception? So to change the perception of, oh, we all want to live like with our own car, AC and whatever, to more of a more sustainable lifestyle.
So I think we've learned in the past 4 years to believe that what's development is what we see in the North. So that's where the copying comes from. And reminiscence of colonization in developing countries has also kind of contributed to this. But if you look at many societies, even in the developing countries, now people are, there is a tendency to go back to nature and live with an eco-friendly lifestyle for those who are aware of what's creating, what are the impacts that are created due to what we are consuming. So if you take Sri Lanka, there is a community that's growing that goes into organic food consumption or working with more eco-friendly practices. I personally don't have a own vehicle, so I always, I'm someone without a vehicle that's a private car. So there are certain people who have understood how consumption works and how this can be expanded by being more of a sustainable lifestyle or healthy lifestyle person. So awareness plays a key role, and also trend setting. So if you look at the West, even the global North, a lot of people are going towards eco-friendly lifestyles. So this being the trend would help the young people like you to adapt to a lifestyle which is more eco-friendly, climate-friendly, and sustainable. So the trends that are promoted and awareness that is created among communities will help shift from this concept that we need our own vehicle, things that are from the West, more phones and more products, as something that's not the most chic thing to do. So mindset change would help to get us to become more sustainable, I believe.
Thank you very much. And I see just Professor Brandt just joined us as well.
Hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Do you hear me?
We can hear you well. Can you hear us?
Yes, very good. If the transfer is not good enough, I will switch off the camera. Then it's better that you listen to me. Well, but if you hear me well, we can still keep the camera.
We'll hear you well. We'll let you know if that changes. So we already have Vositha on the line. She already started with some of the questions. One first question I have to you, because we unfortunately didn't have the chance to talk yet. Professor Brandt, how may I address you? First name basis, last name basis, what would you prefer?
Ulrich, it's okay.
Very good. Hi, I'm Benny. Yeah. So we just had a very quick question for Vositha, which is about how she sees like the more an exchange on a South-by-South basis, and how it's important to also challenge the status quo of, you know, the North defining what is the right things to do, and not adapting everything that comes from there just because it originates from there. With the follow-up questions, where we're also referencing your work, which is about how could we encourage a lifestyle perception change so that a more sustainable lifestyle is seen as something you should strive towards versus consumerism and ownership of things. And I think that would also be my question to you. So you mentioned a few things around, for example, the food of nowhere concept, and also, for example, a stronger rail network in the north. Where would you start more from a sustainable perception point of view? So what would be your steps or your suggestions on how can we change the perception in the general population of actually the northern lifestyle is not something I'm striving towards, but maybe something I don't want because it is wasting resources and not sustainable?
I would introduce two different terms. Can you listen to me well?
I think you're breaking up a little, so maybe we try without the video.
Oh, okay. Okay, I would introduce two different terms. Instead of lifestyle, I would, as I said in my presentation, a mode of living. A lifestyle is something very personal, which is important, and we need, of course, a responsible consumption. And if I understood Vositha right, this is she referred to this. But a mode of living is a conception where we bring together a mode of production. Who is producing the iPhones? Who is producing the food? Who is producing even public transport? And then with the form how people live and work. And this is not to excuse people if they have not a sustainable lifestyle, but the mode of living refers much more to the social, the political, the cultural structures, the mindset that are deeply inscribed. And the second difference I would make is, beside the perception, and also then the consciousness, is the real practice. So even if we have today in Austria, beside the governmental crisis, or let's say in Western Europe, we have a strong perception of the environmental crisis. Fridays for Future is the most recent outcome or expression of this. We have practices, everyday practices, that are still very unsustainable. So what we need to change is the perceptions of society, the self-perception, how people want to live, but also how can we change these socially genderized practices, that people eat meat, that people use a car, that people fly, etc., etc. This is a bit our approach. So again, it's not to excuse irresponsible consumption, but to look also at the social structures, the economic power, the political power, the mindset power, and so on. So coming back then to your question, what are the entry points? The entry points are, of course, a certain politicization or a certain takeover of more responsibility. And Fridays for... My point is always now, I was in the last 6 days in 3 evenings discussing with the Fridays for Future students and pupils. My point is, of course we need this, but the question whether we have we take the way towards more sustainability is also a cultural level. How now the young people start to talk to their parents. Hey, mom and dad, we don't want SUVs. We don't want to fly to our holidays. We don't want to eat meat, etc., etc. This is the cultural thing. But also then we have to stop meat factories. We have to stop the production of SUVs. We have to rebuild our cities to have really sustainable cities and not cities that are made for cars. We need to block the powerful interests of the financial industry, of the industry that producing this stuff. So this is a bit our approach. This is the reason why we talk about the imperial mode of living and that we need an alternative, a solidarity mode of living. I hope that I got it through.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'll just turn to the audience if we have questions from the audience at this point in time. Either Ulrich or Vositha, here in the front.
Ja, ich Hello for everyone, my name is Zhenya. So towards your question, my question would be to Professor, because we are talking about anti-globalism, about responsible consumption, and we see that it's like we are in minority, that even in developed world, we just exploit the developing South, and we exploit it, and we by global corporations, and in result we have this inequality what we experience. And you were talking about transition, about their changing of perception of society, but do you think that it's possible to change this human nature of seeking in the power and then looking for because we are every time looking for even we are now wealthy, we want to be more wealthy and wealthier, and it's like pure structure, like normal structure of the developed world. How it might change? How, I personally believe that it goes from our own habits, from our own actions, and we should start to recycle, reduction of meat on personal level. But just like we are not in a power, we are just like one unit of the global. Thanks.
That was a question for Ulrich or for both? For both. Okay. Who would like to take it first? Sorry, Ulrich, we only hear you very badly at the moment.
Would you like to start?
Just try again, please. Yeah.
Who should start? Who should start to answer? Can you listen to me?
Sorry, Ulrich, your line is breaking up quite a bit. Not sure if you changed your position or internet.
Okay.
Ulrich, if you try to maybe see to get a better signal. Okay. Vositha, I think you start first, and then we try if we can get Ulrich back on the line.
Okay, sorry, I thought the question was for the professor. But I think it was about perception, if I got it right, how we change perceptions and how as individuals we could make a change to shift to a sustainable mode of living or lifestyle. I hope I got it right. So how can we do this? If we take examples from what we've done in Sri Lanka, I think some of the projects I presented, like Meatless Monday, that is all about changing food choices. And when we started this, we had like a small group of people, small group of entrepreneurs producing vegan and vegetarian food. But through awareness, promotion of this lifestyle and choices, there's now a reasonable amount of entrepreneurs and people who have adapted this lifestyle more than when we started. So it's all a matter of convincing, advocating, and being champions for change in sustainable choices that we make and for a healthy lifestyle and eco-friendly lifestyle. And even if we think we are alone, it's not necessarily the case, because one person changing and another person being convinced to change would be the start of how you create change. That was the case for many things that have changed the world today. So starting by one person believing in something and convincing around you, your family, your friends, could be the start of a good movement that could create a larger and global change. And that's happened in many things before. So this could be an example to do it too.
Hello, Ulrich. Thank you very much, Vositha. First of all, apologies. Ulrich, can you
listen
hear us
now?
again? We can hear you better now, yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I have three thoughts on this very important question. The first is we have to acknowledge, and we know this from a lot of research, change starts from the edges. This is also what Vositha was referring to. It's usually the changes, the social ecological changes mainly, don't come from the mid of the society. So we need these spaces of alternative experiences. We need this conference as we are organizing and participating. Second is we have also historical knowledge what to do with power. And I would say there is a long tradition checks and balances. And what took place under neoliberalism is that this checks and balances, the old form was destroyed, and that power powerful groups, political and economic groups, could dominate and could do what they wanted to do. So I think is these forms of checks and balances. And the third aspect, to your question, the human nature question, is we need different forms of well-being, different models of well-being. The historical form of well-being and of social equality was at the cost of nature. So the Social Democrats, the Conservatives, all the parties said, we want to have more in societies, we want to distribute, but the struggle was over distribution, but not how the cake was baken. So the point today is the turning point. We need forms of well-being. What is good transport? What is good nutrition? What is good living? What is good communication? What are good cities? But these must be resource light. So then we come to very concrete proposals. We have to get rid of the meat industry. And that we have to really reduce, we need to reduce the consumption of meat, but not as experience of loss, but an experience of different forms of well-being, that a diet without meat is also very valuable. If we go to the cities, we need car-free cities. We need cities liberated from cars, because the automobilization of the world is destroying our planet. So, but not experienced as loss, but as a gain, that we have cities like now, like Delhi, like Vienna, like Berlin, whatever, that are liberated from cars, but we have a good transport system. The point is, we need to redefine well-being. And the traditional form of well-being was more goods, more services, and this has to be resolved.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. We had a bit of interference, but we got, so as to start from the middle, checks and balances have to be put back into place to also counter some of the interest groups of the big industries, and especially then new definitions of well-being that also consider, quality of air, quality of living, and sustainability in the whole process, and not just about personal wealth. Do we have another question from audience? Yes, there in the middle. Or you prefer? Might be easier for them to see you if you stand up. Just introduce yourself, please. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Pasha Aulia Muhammad. I'm from Indonesia. And my question okay, I don't know to who exactly, maybe just a general question.
Hey, both.
So, you mentioned that we need to transition to a sustainable future, a sustainable economy, an economy where we use less resources and less energy. I don't know if you mentioned energy, but I've heard less resources, because the planet simply cannot sustain this, how should I put it, this rate of usage of natural resources. But my question is, so far in human civilization, we have used more and more resources. This is the trend. For example, we used first human energy, and then later animal energy, and then wood, and then coal, and then oil, and so on and so forth. So is it really, how should I put it, possible for us to transition to an economy where we suddenly stop using more resources? Like, this seems to be against the historical trend. Like, I saw, for me personally, I think the future of growth is probably more of what Jeff Bezos has said in his presentation for his space company, Blue Origin. He said that we only have two alternatives. The first one is we remain on Earth, we ration everything. Our second alternative is to expand towards something else, towards the resources of space, for example, towards a solar system where 1 trillion people will live in relative prosperity, rather than ration everything on Earth. So is it really possible to transition to a system where we deliberately degrowth ourselves? Thank you very much.
My point is not degrow. Do you listen?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. My point is not degrow. My point is to make a different economy. Degrowth means that we have something and that we go down. Of course, the term, I use the term because it's very provocative, but in fact, it means that we need to reorganize our provision systems. What I already said, nutrition, housing, cities, and so on. And I don't know whether it works. I'm not, I can't tell you, but I think the challenge is to think it. And I see the blue economy, all these promises that we go through it via technology, revolutions, and so on. This is, at first hand, we don't know, and it's even more dangerous if we believe in these technological venues or currents. And the second thing is, if we think in these, we will get the resources, and the question of resources and of energy is always a question of power. So we have to link, I'm a political scientist, and the main political science is thinking about power. This was my checks and balances argument, how to redistribute not only resources, how to redistribute the access to resources. And this is linked to power, this is linked to money, this is linked to a very powerful financial capital. So I hesitate to believe that we will get the resources of space, or that we will get them. Now the new trend is from the oceans. We know that there are enormous resources in the oceans, but who is accessing the oceans? Who is appropriating the resources? So I would be a bit more defensive in the sense that to look what we have, and always to look at the power relations involved to the access to resources and the control of resources. And my point is, if we want this change, the social ecological change, we have to reorganize our forms of well-being. And this again, it's how to live, how to organize the cities and so on, and then to reflect how these are organized today and against these power relations, through these power relations.
Thank you, Ulrich. Vositha, from also, linking back to what we've been talking about before to this question, how did you see in the projects you've been working on also with your organizations, right? How did you see a shift maybe then in thinking, or what were your thoughts on, did this kind of, in a way of degrowth, like using less resources, was that something that happened there, and what was the perception or the impact of that in your projects?
I think Professor's answer kind of summed up some of the words that I used in my presentation, like access to resources and equitable access to resources, because there's also the right to development of Global South, the developing countries, that we need to consider. Every time we talk about degrowth, then it becomes, do we have enough growth in some countries? But it's all coming back to how do we have a different lifestyle or use resources differently to ensure that we do not overuse it or exploit it. And can we make this happen? I guess it's all about changing our way of thinking. And when we had to change our way of thinking, it's usually when there's a crisis or people understand that there's danger and a threat to some sort of comfort that we had. In communities that we work with, usually they're vulnerable communities. They have lack of resources, which make it more valuable for them. So, for example, if it's water resources, they do understand the value of using resources in a sustainable manner because they've got years of drought that haven't given them access to water. And also in terms of sharing resources, how can we use them equitably for all farmers to access them? So when we know that there is not enough resources for us to use, either one, the control of resources, as Professor highlighted, could create issues or conflict, like in my presentation I presented. So the management of resources in a manner that everyone has access equally and in a share-based or just-based manner would be important for us to understand that resources can be utilized and used in a sustainable manner, because the lack of it would make us want to have a way that is more sustainable if we are to benefit of what is available for us right now.
Thank you very much. Do we have, I think we had a question over there before. Yes, to the right there.
Hello, I am from India, and as we talk about the sustainability and proper usage of the resources, just as an extension to the questions which have been asked before, livestock comes as a very big challenge to climate change, the consumption of dairy products or meat in itself. But I have a question, like we explain people and we try to work on psychology. What would be a stand on brands like McDonald's and KFC, which are just mushrooming in every nook and corner, and we have more and more consumption in that way? Do you think as climate changers or as fighters, can we fight any time coming in future against these kind of organizations and these entrepreneurs?
Who would you like to answer first? Okay, so then let's start with Vositha. Would you like to start on this one?
Okay, that's a tricky question. So yes, so there's the corporate sector, but you have a couple of elements in your question, I think, about livestock and how people go towards food chains and adopt different products that we think is cool, and how can we access or fight these. I think it's not something that's not happening. It's already happening. A lot of work is happening to bring these companies on board to introduce sustainable products. Plus for people to say no to things that are not sustainable. So there is a movement already on this, and even some of these brands have identified that there's a market for sustainable food that is there. So like vegan products are in these brands itself. So working together with the brands that are there that people go to and give an alternate to have a sustainable product would be a starting point. And then also reducing the consumption of brands that are not sustainable. So there's two ways to do it, and it's working together plus rejecting what is not good, and making maybe the non-sustainable products to be more sustainable. I don't want to name brands because it becomes a problem, but I think in general, if we take this approach, we could move towards a more sustainable and since you're targeting livestock, the question, we need to also think about smallholder farmers and how our rejection of certain products could impact them as well. So there's a cycle of production and consumption we need to think about when we are messaging.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I agree with this. I would also say it's important to work with these brands or with these companies to force them, to convince them that they should be sustainable. The second cultural thing would be, and I know that it goes to into the other direction, as you said in your question, it should be uncool. It should be not cool. It should be outdated. It should be awful to go to McDonald's. It's a cultural question that maybe a younger generation says, no, McDonald's is not cool, it's not fancy, it's the other way around. And the third level, I would say, is that we need political regulations, not to prohibit them, this won't be possible, but to say, if McDonald's or KFC produces in our countries and sells in our countries, the products they use must be sustainable. It is not possible to get meat from Brazil, from Argentina, wherever, or from the meat factories in Europe. We need very high ecological and social standards, and then even it's possible to eat the hamburger, but probably it costs more. But this is, I would say, the challenge for the politicians and for public policy to really introduce them, and as critical scientists or as civil society actors or as students to put pressure on the state, on the governments to say, okay, we need these high standards. It's very obvious. Sorry? Did I get...
No, we're hearing you.
Okay, I'm done.
Okay, thank you very much. We have time for one or two more questions. I saw one over there.
Hello, thank you. My name is Andreas, also from Germany. And I would ask, following the question that was mentioned here, if we could do it, the question is how we can tackle especially the big companies, especially also the things that grow and or grew and are so centralized, because I think the big centralized systems, like we have in defense, for example, like we have in like also food production and so on, this is and also like in producing power, they are like in the power to do what they want in the end, and I don't see any force until now, but like more revolution than a transition to do this. So do you have any ideas how to do it, but not just do something on your own level, what is maybe not interesting to like ThyssenKrupp, like big steel companies?
For both of them. So Ulrich, would you like to start on this one?
Yeah, I can give you an example. A year ago, I know it was not public, but I'm close to Greenpeace folks in Austria. Greenpeace started to put pressure on the 3 CEOs of the 3 supermarket chains in Austria that have 85% of the market, of the supermarkets in Austria. And Greenpeace put pressure on the CEOs, on the top management, to say, you have to get rid of palm oil palm oil in products. Because there was a study, not because of the forest in Indonesia or the orang-utans, but palm oil might cause cancer. There was a study. So Greenpeace went to the CEOs saying, if you don't take off palm oil out of your products, we will publish this and we will campaign against you. And all the 3 supermarket chains started to avoid using palm oil in Austria. And it's for one chain, which is called Spar, it's only 4 products left where they use palm oil. So I would say there are interesting, positive examples, and we should look for them, how to really put pressure on the management and playing with their public images, playing with their public relations to say, no, this is not possible. And I would say the same with McDonald's. And there are already some campaigns to say McDonald's should not use a meat from cows that is not sustainably used. And in some countries, McDonald's accepted higher ecological standards, and in other countries not. So we have some good examples where it is possible to really convince the top management to change.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. Vositha, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think one is pressurizing companies to do as that Professor highlighted, and also working with the entities and creating awareness to make changes is something we can do also. Because in Sri Lanka, when we introduced the vegan and vegetarian lifestyles, initially we didn't have more than 1 or 2 items in most menus in Colombo. But now we have hotels that have a separate vegan and vegetarian menu for those who want to order this. So when we understand and we also have a market base, the companies also change what they offer because it's products that are offered to the consumer's demand also. So changing our choices could also impact at certain level, and also pressurizing through advocacy, direct advocacy or public advocacy through campaigns could help change these cycles of consumption and production by big companies as well.
Thank you very much. So we have time for one more question. Who would like to ask? There we have a question in the back.
Hello, my name is Yazan. I'm from Jordan. As for the changes, let's say, in the environment and for the population, do you think that we can use it even in the learning section and for the people who are still young, like in the children? So, because most of the resources that we are used are, let's say, being wasted by people who are not really sure how to use them, or just throw them away because they just don't have to anticipate how much they need, actually. So, should there be any local regulations for schools, or let's say for restaurants, to promote these things, like providing, let's say, a tax on the amount of the food that could be left over, or for the kids at school to be for them to learn how to improve their consumption and know their actual rations?
Thank you very much. Vositha, would you like to start on this one?
Yeah, so awareness targeting, there are two things to this. I think one is awareness, because children actually change their choices and behavior at a young age. It's easy to convince them. So school and adolescents to be the target audience for campaigns and awareness creation would create change. And an example of how policy could work is that in Sri Lanka, we have guidelines for canteens, school canteens, of what kind of products need to be in the school canteen. The guidelines are there, but the implementation is the issue. So there are a lot of policies that can be brought in. There needs to be political will and implementation of these guidelines and knowledge that we share in practice. How do we put it in place? So 2 ways to do it. One is creating awareness, targeting children. Yes, we need to target children because they can be creators of change. Then targeting an audience that's 40 years old, 35 years old, like me, I guess. But there's change that could happen faster with children. Plus bringing in policies, guidelines that could be implemented, targeting them and institutions. and also enforcement of them, which is important. Not just bringing the policy, but making sure that they're enforced in a manner that's effective and efficient.
Thank you very much, Vositha. Ulrich, what would be your comment on this?
Yes, I agree with the guideline question and that we need these regulations, for example, within schools. A second thought is that young people are curious, and the unsustainable industries are playing with this curiousness. And what should we do from the, let's say, sustainability campus also? And this is our experience, that the really young people want to learn, and that we offer them as school teachers, as whatever, the broader public, that they really can learn how to behave ecologically. And this is what, from my perspective, the most important thing with Fridays for Future. They are creating now a public reference point, how to learn how to act differently. And a third thought, or another thought, is coming back to guidelines and regulations. The Green Party in Germany proposed some months ago to forbid public advertising, for the reason that psychologists tell us that young people until 12 to 13 years cannot distinguish what is real and what is on a large poster. So if there is a hamburger, or if there is a car, or if there is a pretty woman or whatever, this is part of the learning of the socialization of a consumerist, sexist society. So the Greens argued we need to abolish public advertising, because this is really putting into the heads of the young people this consumerism, sexism, colonialism that people usually are with other colors. They are presented in another way, and so on. And I find this quite an interesting proposal, which generated an enormous debate, acknowledging that young people cannot defend themselves when they are kind of bombed every day with this public advertising. Just to give you one example.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. Just also for reference for the audience, because not everyone might be familiar with the term Fridays for Future. This references the school protests, getting out of school on a Friday and protesting on the streets, and being very vocal and very loud about it, and which is getting more and more support also from other organizations, and being very different because it is not organized by a central organization, although some, I guess, try to claim it for them. So we're nearly at the end of our time, but because ISWI is always about action, you have people, you know, from many different countries, many nationalities. I would like to just use the last minutes we have for each of you. You mentioned already, I think, some great insights, some great actions that people can take home. But what would be your key things? You know, like the key points for people to take home to their country, maybe something they can change basically tomorrow. And really to make this impact, to start this journey, to change the perception of different modes of living, but also you know how to bring this change and knowledge exchange everywhere. So Ulrich, would you like to start on that?
Yeah. What I recommend in the sense is, of course, we should be very responsible in our private everyday life. But since you are mainly young people, I would also urge to think in your professional career, in your everyday practices, to work wherever, to really make a difference there as a professional. Because usually now the discussion about sustainability is very much focusing on responsible consumption. And I'm saying, when I'm asked by my students, what are you doing? For example, I have no cell phone. I never had a cell phone. Yeah, I don't need it. It's my last resort of liberty, is that I'm not accessible every day. I try not to fly, etc., etc. But this is not my point. My point is that at the University of Vienna, I try to change curricula. I try to be in touch with students. I try to change my courses and so on. So this is my point. It's to avoid a bit the trap. My responsibility is my personal responsibility in the consumption, but within your and our careers, in our professional life, we should also make a difference. This is maybe my main message for you.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. Vositha, what was your recommendations?
One would be, this came a few years ago, this concept, think global but act local, or the other way around. So how can we focus on the local while thinking global in protecting and conserving environment when we take decisions, when we buy something, when we consume something, or we produce something? Can we do it local without making sure, without emitting more carbon and using more resources? One. And also, again, how can we work together as a community of youth, other stakeholders to achieve good in the world? When we make a choice, just think of the impacts, the responsibility we have, and also how much equity or how much access to resources we are using, which will be a problem to others. So be responsible in our choices and try to create good and change that you can at individual level and also together. And a final note, if anyone is interested in the work we do and would like to engage or work as a chapter in Germany, India, or anywhere else from where you are, just contact us and we would like to engage with you in making change, which is local as well as global. Thank you.
Thank you both very, very much from this room.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening. Thank you very much for joining today.
Too. Have a very good conference. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.